I'm Martha Mullen, and you can introduce me as a psychotherapist.
Martha is from Richmond, Virginia. And on the day of the bombing, she was with her daughter.
My daughter and I were at the Humane Society looking for our dog who'd run off, and then I looked over at the television in the lobby, and the bombing had just occurred moments before, and it was on the daytime television.
Major breaking news right now. 2 people dead after
I remember seeing the face of the little boy who was killed. There's a picture of him. Actually, I think he had a sign that he'd drawn about peace and being peaceful. And I thought, how sad that this little boy lost his life.
But in the days following the bombing, Martha says she saw the collective sadness around this tragedy morph into something uglier. She was sitting in the Starbucks reading the news online when she saw the angry protesters outside the funeral home in Worcester.
There were lots of people holding up signs, looking very angry, waving American flags, which I thought was unfortunate. To me, that's a form of extremism. And I remember feeling angry at the protesters for their xenophobia. And I remember feeling disgusted.
So sitting in the coffee shop, watching the news of the protests, Martha wanted to do something, but she was just one person.
One of my favorite quotes is from Gandhi. Whatever you do may seem insignificant, but it's most important that you do it.
Okay. So that was from actually our pilot episode from this year, How to Get Rid of a Body. And so just in terms of the concept of our show, we created a dark how-to guide. And the idea was creating a kind of alternative how-to guide to things you wouldn't learn in school. This was actually our second season of it. So our original season, we did the how-to guide to things you hope you never need to know. So we really focused on situations that you hoped you never found yourself in: how to disappear, how to win a feud, how to die. And then this year we kind of opened it up a little bit to sort of the things you never learned in school, just an alternative how-to guide: how to become famous, how to speak to the dead. And so the idea was, and this is kind of something we struggled with the whole time. We loved having that framework of a how-to guide and trying to find a way to make it instructional, to kind of honor what the concept was, to have you would actually learn something as you listen to the show. But then we also were like, this is just a great platform for storytelling. And I think that was one of the things, I don't know that we actually ever really settled on what the happy medium was. I think actually this second season we tended more towards the storytelling and a little bit less from the instructional. But the idea was always to sort of present an idea, to present a concept, and then have different stories that would somehow illuminate, whether it's an interesting story, somehow illuminate an aspect of that concept in a surprising way. And I thought this was kind of a pretty good example of taking like a surprising idea, like how to get rid of a body. This story was the story of Tamerlan Tsarnaev, one of the Boston bombers. And what happened was that after he was the one that was killed, no one would bury him, and he kind of got stuck in this morgue for a couple weeks, and it became this huge issue. It became a flashpoint. People were protesting, saying, get him out of here. We don't want him here. But they wanted to send him back to Russia. Russia wouldn't take him. And so it was actually this story of like how do we get rid of this physical body. And this random woman popped up out of Virginia and just said, this is bad. This is not who we are as a people. This is not American. This is not the kind of values I believe in. And she had no connection to it. And she just said, I want to find a way to bury him. And so it was like, wow, this is a story people knew about the Boston bombing. I don't think a lot of people knew about this story. And we thought this was a really good and surprising angle into this theme, and kind of was indicative of, I don't know if we always succeeded, but we kind of always wanted to find stories that were surprising ways to get at the topic.
If I can add just in terms of tone for the show, we wanted to sort of strike a balance between being playful and irreverent, but also treating these stories that are really serious with a kind of gravitas that they warranted. So I think this was a really good example of the kind of story that, we treated with respect, because it's about a person who died, who also killed a lot of other people. So there's lots of layers and sort of a complicated story. But we wanted to. So that said, it was in a show about how to get rid of a body, which you could say was sort of perhaps could be seen as a flip way of treating the subject. But what we really wanted to do with the concept of the show was to answer the questions that we posed in unexpected ways. So when you think about getting rid of a body, the first thing you think about would probably not be how do you get rid of the body of a pariah who's responsible for the deaths of Americans. And that segment was in a show with some pretty playful, funny concepts as well. Like there was a segment about a woman whose uncle had to bury his leg because of her Jewish Orthodox background. There was a story about a man who has a disorder where he feels like his legs aren't his. So there was a lot of there was a range of stories, but ultimately what we wanted to do was to try and answer that question: how do you get rid of a body in some unexpected and compelling ways that that were respectful, but also, when appropriate, that were playful.
A good place to start is have one really exciting element, whether it's a melody or a phrase, or is that kind of where we need to start?
I think so.
Put your right foot in, take your right foot out, get a slice of lemon.
I don't understand the lemon thing. I just want to, if you guys need the lemon thing in there, then we'll have it.
I think a lemon says good times.
Great screenwriting. You always have kind of a time limit. You have to introduce a time limit.
Tonight's the night. Tonight we do it. Tonight it happens.
Twist a lemon, take your pulse, only 1 month of law school.
So I think own the dance floor is maybe the best thing.
We really need tonight, best foot forward.
Are these the lyrics, or are these just things you're telling me in no particular order?
I really like the first two lines. If it's gonna rhyme, you somehow want that last statement to really
Surprise.
Yes.
I think it's tonight's the night, and we've got moves.
Yours to lose.
I'm yours to lose. Suddenly you're like, who are we talking? Who is talking to who? Whom is talking to whom? Anyway, okay, so I think we have a line. I think we have a chorus.
Great. Should we take it to the piano?
Sure. Okay, why don't you just start singing? Why don't you just start singing these? Just start singing it and just see where it takes you.
Oh, on the dance floor. Or check your pulse.
Oh, yeah.
Tonight's the night. We've got moves. I'm yours to lose.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty good, actually. Oh, on the dance floor. Or check your pulse. Tonight's the night. We've got moves. And I'm yours to lose. Yeah, it's good.
That's great.
It's actually really good.
This is how it feels. It always feels like it's great.
When do you discover that it's not great?
When you release it.
And nobody dances?
Exactly.
So, yeah, as Josh was saying, we went into this segment, we pretty much did everything you're not supposed to do before you go out and gather tape, which is, we didn't have a clear idea of what we were going to come back with. We didn't really know if the whole concept was going to work. And so the risk, and obviously there's tons of risks inherent in that, but I think the approach that we took was to gather as much tape as we could and figure out, and really let the thing breathe. Because Josh and Sarah had a relationship with Dan Werb, who was the music producer, we wanted to give the listeners a good sense that they had a rapport. They were kind of, poking fun at each other. And we, in fact, discussed whether or not we should acknowledge that in the script. And eventually we thought, of course, the listeners need to know that these guys are friends because it makes much more sense. So not knowing what the process would entail allowed us to experiment and to really play with the sound that we had gathered, and to also craft a bit of a narrative with the tape that we came back with, because I don't know how many hours it was, maybe 3 or 4.
No, it was like 15 or 20. I just sat there with him as he wrote the song, and we were writing it.
Right. But so we, coming back with
not to make a summer show, spend 15 or 20 minutes or hours recording something for a 5 minute.
Right. But I think that the we often hear when you go out and gather tape, you should have a really clear sense of what you're going to come back with. And I think that in terms of the finished product, we knew that we wanted to take listeners on a journey of how do you create a hit song. That's what we wanted to do. How that was going to come together was not necessarily that clear until we came back to the tape and were really able to pinpoint the elements that the listener would need in order to follow this story. So I think the finished product, I hope, gave people a sense of time passing, gave them a sense of the interaction between you and Dan, and also, and really it was we just wanted to have fun and strike a balance between not being, funny only to ourselves and too self-indulgent, and also, letting listeners in on this little scene that our hosts.
So when was the last time you heard a host in a radio show be the subject of the story, be out their own story? Never, right? We never do. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So.
Oh, the other thing I'll just mention quickly, in terms of the structure of the show, when you're thinking about pitching, there was a bit of an evolution with the initial pitch that Sarah and Josh had submitted to the Program Development Committee and to what we ended up actually using as a structure on the show. So the first run of how to do it had a very clear structure of 3 lessons, or 3 stories, and a field piece, and then an interview piece. We totally blew that open the second time around, and I think our sort of guiding principle in terms of figuring out how much time stories warranted was really simple. It was, is this interesting? Does it warrant the time? Is it boring? If it's boring, we try not to put it on the air, or not give it the amount of time that a certain structure would dictate to us. So in terms of thinking about a pitch when you're putting it together, I would say think about how you want the show to be structured, but also be open to the idea that once you actually start putting the pilot together, you may realize that the structure is maybe constrains you a bit more than you'd like, or that there are different ways of organizing the ideas that you want to have in the show.